and welcome back to another series of Ask Me Anything. It's where you, the audience, gets to ask a subject matter expert here at TSA. And today we have Andrew Bowie from the Office of Occupational Safety, Health, and Environmental Division. He's actually an environmental management program. So welcome.
Thank you.
Round of applause for him. So we were kind of talking off camera right before we started and got to know him a little bit. So he has a background in chemistry, which is amazing. But when I think of chemistry, I think of high school and college, and it was difficult.
Yeah.
So, but you found interest in it.
Absolutely.
Fascination.
Absolutely.
So,
from a very young age.
Could you tell us a little bit about your role within TSA and how chemistry kind of plays a role in your role today?
Okay. Well, chemistry really prepared me for this more than I use it on a daily basis. But my role here is I'm the Environment and Energy Branch Chief, so I'm responsible for TSA's environmental management energy programs nationwide. So the thing that people probably see and understand the most is still today, we have a number of people who come to the airport on purpose, or maybe they forget, that there's things in their baggage that they're not supposed to have. Some of those things, when we have to manage them and dispose of them after they're surrendered to us, are actually hazardous wastes according to the law. And because of that, there are specific things we must do to have appropriate disposition. Some of those things are recycling, some of those things are having it disposed of as hazardous waste. So that's the thing that most people know, but there are other laws, regulations, executive orders that each agency has to abide by. So we have additional programs related to the National Environmental Policy Act, which is environmental planning. So every time the government takes an action, they have to review the action for its potential environmental impact. Now, some of these reviews are really small. So some people have heard it. NEPA is an acronym that's been used before.
Okay,
by a
I'm
lot
not
of people.
familiar with NEPA.
Yeah, it's the National Environmental Policy Act.
Okay.
Right? So that says that when the government takes an action, they have to review the potential environmental impact. Now, there's 3 levels of review, the smallest being a categorical exclusion. And those are things that we do every day. In fact, we have to review the impact of paying us. Right? Technically, there's a piece of paper, we go, yeah, paying us is not really an environmental impact. But there are other things where we test technology, or we had a facility out in Pueblo, Colorado, which was going to be using explosives as part of that process. We had to do something called an environmental assessment for that, which is a much higher level. We take a look at some of the bugs and bunnies and things that might happen there. And then there are EISs, environmental impact statements, much bigger, broader things, something they would do for the border wall, for example. So you're having this large potential impact. What are you going to do to mitigate it? That's just
a fraction of what
we're responsible for. Now, our TSA is not that broad, but it's just an example.
Awesome.
We also have responsibilities for recycling programs, green procurement, our fleet and transportation programs. They're not under me officially as a line, but a dotted line. So we work closely with our transportation folks to make sure that our fleet is as efficient as it can be in terms of fuel use. I think I got everything in there. So
I know, you pretty much
answer,
covered a lot, but I mean, I don't even know where to begin. So when we're talking about the things that people are surrendering,
yeah.
What are some of the frequently items that are surrendered at the checkpoint? What is something we can be mindful? Are we keeping track of how much is being collected at every airport?
We have about 1.3 million pounds of material that is surrendered annually. Of that, about 70% or so are aerosols.
Okay.
Body sprays, hairspray,
Perfumes,
spray.
maybe.
Yeah. And then about 30% of that are flammable liquids, most of which, or maybe half, are drinking alcohols. And that depends on where you are. Like in Miami, it's going to be a lot more drinking alcohol than in Des Moines. Right? But there's also, like you said, there are perfumes, colognes, things of that nature. And again, upon disposal, they have to be managed properly. So we have, I'd say, about 15% nationwide of our flammable liquids, which are alcohol, drinking alcohol. We have going to recycling, right? And the rest of the alcohol.
So what we're saying is
flammables.
that we're not just tossing them or
No.
making you throw them in the trash, because that's what it looks like. If I got caught with a water bottle, it looks like I'm tossing in the trash. We have an actual, we're keeping track of those items and disposing them
right.
correctly.
And it
'cause
depends
it's
on
by-
what category they fall into.
Okay.
So you said water bottle, for example.
Right.
So a lot of people are interested, well, why can't we recycle it, or why don't we do certain things?
Right.
Well, with consumables, anything someone's going to put in their body, we don't have the capacity to verify that it hasn't been tampered with. Well, I didn't open it. Well, we don't know, and we're not going to spend our valuable resources trying to figure that out.
Right.
What we do try to do is have relationships with the airport authorities so that when you're taking your water bottle and you're throwing it away or in a can,
Right.
or you brought that oversized bottle of shampoo that's in a plastic recyclable bottle, what we've tried to do is have relationships with the airport's authority so that those things go in their recycling stream. If we're
Okay.
talking about alcohol or your body spray, then yes, we have to account for that. We have a special way we have to handle it, store it, and have it disposed. So there's accountability for all of those items.
So, Andrew, a friendly reminder that we're actually collecting questions also from the field. So
Sure.
if you guys have any questions, please bring them along. Andrew's ready to answer
Right.
accordingly. And one of the questions we just received was, could you tell us a little bit about the chemicals that are found in water bottles and ethanol products like alcohol?
Well,
What makes them dangerous?
Well, for alcohol, drinking alcohol,
Uh-huh.
as you know, it's flammable, right?
Right.
So that's what makes it a hazardous waste upon disposal. But what we do, because there's a special exemption, we take the alcohol, we send it to a facility, it is distilled down and reused in an additive for fuel.
Interesting.
Right? So
okay.
when you go to the gas pump and it says 10% ethanol in your gas, we are contributing to that process.
So I have a question. So and we want to kind of remind the traveling public that we're not saying that no liquids or even alcohol is allowed. They just have to follow our 3-1 liquids
Correct.
rule. So, and if you want more information, you can always check our website at tsa.gov. But so, what would you say is the number one item that we're collecting from the checkpoint from travelers that are forgetting that this item is not allowed through security?
It's more of a category than a thing.
Okay.
So aerosols, primarily aerosol cans. Again, we're talking about body sprays, hair sprays, some shaving creams, things like that.
So could you tell us a little bit about technology and how technology plays a role within your role, the agency, and the airport, and how it affects the traveling public? And
Well, from an environmental management standpoint, what we do under the Environmental Policy Act is review those technologies for their potential impact environmentally, safety concerns, those kinds of things, so that we can have technology that has the least potential impact that it has to be effective at supporting the screening operation. We don't make decisions about whether they can or cannot use those technologies.
so you're testing them, or
no.
how do you measure that?
Well,
what does that look like?
What we try to say is, like if we look at our ETD machines, right? What we look at is what impact on the environment, if this thing is running, does it have? And since most of our ETDs have a radiological source, when it's on, it can have an impact. But it's on for such a short period of time that, birds, bees, trees don't have anything to worry about, right? So it's kind of small, like a bread box. If we were, I don't know, doing something outside like the border wall, well, that's a much bigger thing. And so again, we wouldn't say you can't build the wall or you can build the wall. What we would say is building the wall is going to have these kind of impacts. And if we're okay with that, fine. If we're not, let's do something to mitigate what those impacts are. So we're not decision makers in that.
Okay, so kind of going back, so would you say like every agency has someone similar to you that manages it, their agency's use of how we're eco-friendly? I mean,
Yes,
it's no coincidence.
there's an environmental manager for every agency.
Okay.
And the scope of what they have to manage varies because of the scope of the mission for every agency. So
It's no coincidence that Earth Day is on Sunday, and
Yeah.
this is why we're here and kind of talking about how we can best prepare and be more friendly to our Earth.
Mhm.
So our headquarters is actually moving to another location.
Yeah.
And what would you say are some of the things that we're looking into when we're deciding on a location to move the agency?
Okay. Well, for TSA's headquarters agency location search, we actually contracted with GSA. So TSA is going to be an occupant of a GSA-owned building and site. But we are part of the process. So when you're looking at that, again, falls under the National Environmental Policy Act. They had to look at the actual physical site, the traffic that was going to be coming in and out of that site, the flora and fauna that would be affected by what they would be building and how they might build those things. So my role, or my team's role, was to help review that process, be a reviewer of the work that they did, so that we can say,
I see a question related to this, by the way. It's coming from Dan, and he's asking if the new building will be LEED certified.
Yes, it will be LEED certified, I believe.
Is it LEED certified?
Yeah,
Did
that's
I say it wrong?
Yeah.
So what is LEED certified?
I knew you were going to ask me that. We have so many
Did I put you on the
acronyms.
spot? Okay, because
Yeah.
I that was a little, I was like, so was I supposed to say LEED or LEED?
I should know, but we have so many acronyms, it'll come to me later, right?
Got it.
But
But just a summary of what that means.
Well, it's a standard.
Okay.
Right? And so the idea here is in the construction of our buildings, government-wide, because the government really is a leader in LEED certification and building construction, as GSA is the leader in real estate for us. What it's supposed to be is, I believe our building is supposed to be gold LEED, right?
Gold
so it's
LEED,
a standard.
okay.
And so it talks about what our HVAC systems are going to be like, what the materials we're going to be using, and whether they're recycled content, those kind of things. The adhesives we might use in the carpet and what the carpet's made of. So we look at all of these things, and it's like a point system. If you're doing all of these things and you get so many points, then your building will be LEED certified at a certain standard.
So kind of going back to the airport. Our officers are known for, in most cases, blue gloves, and I think that's recently changed. There are different other colors.
Gloves, yeah.
What is that? How is that recyclable? How are we? And they're disposable, I'm assuming. So how are we recycling disposable gloves?
Well, we're not.
Okay.
And we're not because mostly it is an economy of scale problem.
Okay.
It's not that there aren't individuals who have the ability to do something with nitrile gloves or some of the other materials that would otherwise be waste for us, for example. But we have airports at 400 whatever number of locations around the country. Getting all the gloves to one spot so that an individual or two could take advantage of that is very difficult, and it's costly. So it's a cost, again, from a resource allocation standpoint, that TSA has decided the cost is greater than the benefit to us, right? And so we've looked into it actually probably 4 or 5 times over the last 10 or 12 years to see if yet have we reached a place where the technology or the ability to do it is there. It's just not been there.
And we're still talking about like the strips, as we mentioned, that we're not saying that no water is allowed. There's certain special circumstances that allow liquid medications
Sure,
and
absolutely.
actual water to go through. So we're inspecting them with strips. We're also checking for explosives through swiping of the machines. So what do we do with those items once we use them? Are we recycling those items?
No, those are completely disposable. Anything related to the screening operation, there has to be sort of a baseline. So we can't go and reuse certain things because the ETD systems are quite sensitive, right? So if I've swabbed you and you didn't have anything, or you had something and I didn't do something like use a new one, and then I swab someone else, then I have potential cross-contamination, those kind of things. So we don't do that so that we don't introduce risk to some other person that didn't do something or isn't a problem.
So we got a good question that just came in from Holly, and she wants to know if TSA sets their own environmental standards, or is this government-wide? Good question.
Good
considering
questions.
That TSA
There are,
is a young agency.
Yeah, there are government-wide regulations. The Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, which covers hazardous waste management and disposal, is standard for everybody. There are state regulations that are similar, that they are authorized to act on behalf of the federal government, but those regulations have to be at least as strict, right? NEPA National Environmental Policy Act is also just a federal thing, but there are a lot of states who have a version of NEPA, right? So they might have something like the state of Hawaii, because of all of the flora and fauna that they have additional measures that you have to take. So what we do at TSA, we have things that we want going on at our airport operations or field operations because they serve our ability to manage TSA's liability. So we have policies and procedures that function as a way to help us reduce TSA's environmental liability and impact.
And then
under those laws.
Understand. So, but if we had a crystal ball, and what are our future goals? What's up in the horizon? Like, what is the ideal place to be?
Well, if I could do it at all, we'd have zero emissions. That would be that we're not putting anything out there. And probably to get there, there'd be a combination, a change in process, an upgrade in technology. We'd have something that would allow us to be able to screen a person and their materials really quickly to know whether or not they're friend or foe, and they can go through to the sterile area. And so we wouldn't be taking voluntarily abandoned property from anybody, which means that our biggest environmental risk in terms of waste management would disappear. But that's probably a little far out in the future.
So the majority of our audience are actually the traveling public.
Yeah.
So what are some helpful tips that you would give the traveling public the next time they visit the security checkpoint? How could you give them something to be mindful of when they're checking their packing for their
Well, yeah,
flight?
that's where I would start. When you're getting ready to travel, right, you just have to be mindful of things that you want to take, whether you're going to check it, which is a whole nother opportunity for you to bring things, versus I'm going to carry it on with me. We have a 311 liquid gel rule that has been in place now for a number of years, but we still have maybe 3-4% of the traveling public that forget or whatever. So they come and have items that they have to surrender, or they want to go and mail back, or they want to go give to the friend who dropped them off, or whatever they want to do with it. So just be mindful. You're going on travel. Be mindful what you're putting in, you carry on in particular, right? And if you have a question, you can go to tsa.gov and find out what may or may not be allowed, right?
Yeah, I think I saw a couple of travel tip questions, and I would encourage that. Our website is a great source to get those questions. But is there any final thoughts before we end our interview today that you'd like to share? Even if it's personal. You mentioned having children. So I also have children. So we think about how, so much has changed with our environment. It's scary to think what could go wrong. But how do we teach the next generation to better prepare so they're not going to struggle in the not affecting the earth one way or the other?
Well, you're going to, right? We're an entity, we're a being that's about balance, not about not affecting. It's how you affect and whether or not that effect over a long run is going to be more detrimental or less detrimental. So, but mostly I think when you're talking about things like environmental management and our impacts, whether it's industry or whatever, there's just a balancing act. And I think as parents, for example, you model that stuff, right? So what you do matters. Your kids pay attention. Right? Now, your kids are younger than mine, but I have mine, and we have things, say, in the backyard, and one of the things I found out is that some of our modeling was working, because we have a big recycling bin, and we'd have people over, and they would throw plastic water bottles or soda cans in the trash, and they'd be like, ooh!
The awareness is
you
there.
can't do that, yeah. So I think, the kids pay attention, the people, I think you'd have to be almost blind not to know that what we're doing is not impacting the earth. The question is how well or how deeply, and can we do things that are a little less negatively?
Absolutely.
So because the earth is going to be here. I had one of my chemistry professors say, it's going to be the earth, rats, and plastic, right?
It's like WALL-E.
So, right.
Do you remember the movie? Yeah.
So we just have to do our level best. Don't do harm if you don't have to.
Right. Well, Andrew, it was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. And make sure to tune in next time. I think it's in a couple weeks. And thanks again for tuning in. See you next time.